This is the Vanguard podcast. I'm Gavin.
And I'm Zac.
And today we've just been joined by Ryan Knight, activist and host of the podcast Amped Up with Ryan Knight, also a member of the People's Party Advisory Committee. How's it going today, comrade?
Hey, good. Thank you guys for having me. And thank you guys for doing such good work for the movement.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I guess a good place to start would just be, the election has been called by the media, by all the mainstream outlets. Biden looks like has won the election. Can we just get your immediate reaction to that news, to our political situation in the wake of, November 3rd's election, and also just your opinion on how the left should conduct itself going forward in opposition to, the Democratic establishment over the next 4 years?
Yeah, look, I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief. I wanted to, I saw people celebrating and I was just in my head, I'm thinking that would be nice. But unfortunately, we're stuck in this corrupt political system that goes back and forth every 4 to 8 years between neoliberal corporate extremism and, right-wing neo-fascism. And, that is not the kind of politics that is going to heal this nation or move this nation forward. I think that, we are just in a time in our history where we have massive levels of injustice and inequality. And if these corporate Democrats think that we can just, pretend oh, Trump is gone, now everything is great now, and let's go back to 2008 or, 2012, when Obama was still president, those were the very conditions that led to Donald Trump being elected in the first place, right? And so we have to break this cycle. We have to break this stranglehold that Wall Street and giant corporations and the ruling class have over our government and both corporate parties in Washington. In 2020, Wall Street gave more money to the Democrats than the Republicans. A lot of the liberals and more, the never Trumpers don't realize that, Trump is a symptom. He was always a symptom of our corrupt system, and so, yeah, the corrupt president's gone, but the corrupt system is still alive and well. And what I mean by corrupt system, we have, politicians in our government who use our government to enrich themselves and their corporate donors, and we, the people, are paying the price. They're supposed to be there to serve us, right? They're supposed to be there to serve we, the people. Newsflash, they're not there working for us. They're there working for big pharma, and they're working for the defense industry, and they're working for the giant oil companies. They're not working for the working class. And that really is the problem. So until we fix that, until we get a government that's on our side, working people in this country are going to keep struggling, and all you got to do is look at the last 40 years. Income inequality under both Democrat and Republican administrations since Reagan and the whole failed trickle-down economics, we've seen income inequality increase under both Republican and Democrat administrations. So we know that it's both parties are captured, right, by special interests and by corporate interests. And that is why we have to start organizing, and the left has to start building power outside of these corporate parties. And that is why I got involved with the movement for People's Party. And I know you guys have had some of the speakers from the convention on your podcast, because I just feel like, what the Democratic establishment did to Bernie Sanders in 2016, in 2020, newsflash, they're going to do it again in 2024 to the next progressive who runs in the primary. I wish that wasn't the case. But as long as the DNC is beholden to corporate interest, when you hear people say oh, we'll move Joe Biden left, we'll move the Democratic Party left. What you're really saying is that you're going to move Wall Street left, or you're going to move the oligarchs left, or you're going to move giant corporations left, because those powerful special interests own the Democratic Party. Newsflash, you can't move Wall Street left. You can't move, these oligarchs left. And so that's why you can't really move the Democratic Party left. At its core, and I know people don't like to hear this, the Democratic Party, it's funny when Republicans accuse Democrats of being socialists. I laugh at myself and I think I wish, right? The Democratic Party is not a socialist party. It's not even a progressive party. The Democratic Party is a corporatist party. And now we have a few left members in the party, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, who are trying to, move the Democratic Party to the left toward justice and dignity for all people. And I'm not discounting their work at all. But again, there's less than 10 leftists in the Democratic Party. The rest are corporatists who are fighting against Medicare for all, and they're fighting against the Green New Deal, and they're fighting against basic income. They are fighting against the policies we need to move this country forward. So just supporting the squad isn't enough anymore. I believe we need a two-tiered approach. Sure, support AOC. You know, I support her efforts. Support Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush. I endorsed both of those candidates in the primary. But also, I think in addition to that, we need to build power outside the party. And that will really start to pressure these two corporate parties to act for the people when the left has somewhere to go, right? A lot of it is every election cycle, you know, after the primary, they say, oh, well, you got to vote for the lesser of two evils. What are you going to do? Vote for the Republicans? What are you going to do? Vote for Trump? We have nowhere to go. So as long as the left has nowhere to go, they're going to take our vote for granted. They're going to take the working class for granted. It's once we have a place and a party that will occupy the space where the left, where a true people's party should be, then all of a sudden the Democrats can't take us for granted anymore. Then they can't, you know, work for their corporate donors and thumb their nose at the people. So that's the kind of bold, outside of the box thinking that I believe we need at this moment in history.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I think that the left, obviously we have a power problem. We don't have a popularity of policy problem. You know, that's evidenced by watching Joe Biden bungle a state like Florida, which overwhelmingly supported a $15 minimum wage and also sent, Trump all of their electoral college votes. Right. Looking down ballot, I guess a little bit past the presidential race, obviously the Democrats didn't have the showing that they were hoping for. I mean, you know, Chuck Schumer is, you know, pushing that they have a chance at taking a clean sweep in Georgia, which I think is laughable. And if they don't manage to pull the rabbit out of that hat, I mean, we're looking at, 4 more years of a party line blaming their lack of action on, again, an insubordinate McConnell Senate. I think it breeds a perfect opportunity for the left to lay bare all of that hypocrisy and all of that, controlled opposition energy that the Democrats are always filled with. I guess, what sort of messaging do you think will take hold effectively for the left in this time period when, essentially nothing's being done in the time of crisis, and the Democrats' previous justification for not getting anything done was Donald Trump?
Yeah. So one thing that we need to be very clear about is I thought was, and you kind of were touching on it a little bit, right there, is I found it so just hypocritical that like 2 days after the election, we lost, around 10 House seats. So we lost seats in the House. We did not flip the Senate. There's a small chance we may, depending on what happens in Georgia. But, John Ossoff, in an interview yesterday, they asked him, do you support Medicare for all? And he said, no. And then they were like, do you support a Green New Deal? He said, no. Do you support defunding the police and shifting money into Black and brown communities? He was like, no. And it's like, what are we doing here? And, what I found so, just like I was alluding to earlier, hypocritical is 2 days after the election, they have a call, right? With, I think it was Spamberger, and the corporatists in the House were trying to blame progressives and trying to blame the left like they always do. They love to, represent their corporate donors and punch left. That is like the MO for the Democratic Party. Give their corporate donors everything and punch left at the progressives, stab progressives in the back. But when you dig in the details, you see that no, it wasn't the progressives. That's not the reason we lost down ballot. Every single down ballot progressive who supported Medicare for all in swing districts won their race in those closer races. It was the neoliberal corporatists who, ran uninspiring campaigns, got a lot of corporate money in, but weren't actually supporting the bold policies that the people on the ground want in their communities, who lost their races. So it wasn't the progressives who cost us our majority. It was the corporatists. And what we're seeing now in this moment where people want government to actually represent them, we're seeing that these corporatists, they can raise a lot of money. Look, Amy McGrath raised almost, I think, $100 million, some astronomical number.
In the final weeks of the election, I think Jamie Harrison outraised Trump.
Right. And he did, but they run campaigns where they don't stand for anything. We are in a moment in history where you have to stand for something. You can't just give people something to vote against. You have to give people something to vote for, right? You have to give them Medicare for all. You have to give them a Green New Deal. You have to give them a $22 an hour living wage. You have to give them a universal basic income. You have to give them bold policies to get working class and poor and communities of color to the polls. corporate Democrats don't want to hear any of it. They want to go back to the days of where that was. And here's what we have to be clear about. It kind of worked under the Obama administration. I mean, obviously, there was a lot of income inequality rose. There was 11 million people lost their homes because, after the housing crisis, what did the government do? Like it always does. It bailed out the banks who crashed our economy in 2008, and 11 million people lost their homes. So working people struggled, but I feel like the Democrats still kind of played that game where, Obama would sedate us. He'd go on TV. He was a great storyteller. He's a great orator. And he'd just sedate the public with platitudes of hope and change, right? Then he'd turn around and govern for Wall Street, giant corporations, and the billionaire class. So things kept getting worse and worse for working people. And they got so bad by 2016 that working class people in swing states were desperate enough to vote for a con man. And then after 2016, the corporate Democrats didn't want to do an honest autopsy. They didn't want to take any inventory. What did Hillary and the DNC do? They blamed everyone else. It was Russia. It was Jill Stein. It was the Green Party. It was Bernie Sanders. It was the left. It was everyone else but their terrible, crappy corporatist candidates who didn't campaign in the swing states and didn't stand for anything. Hillary's entire campaign was anti-Trump. And Biden's entire campaign was anti-Trump. And Trump turned out to be such a bad president that was enough to win the election. But just what are they going to do now? What is the Democratic Party going to stand for now that Trump is gone and he's not the scapegoat that they can blame everything on, right? And just bigger picture, we're staring down a pandemic. We are staring down a climate crisis. We are staring down a racial injustice crisis, and we are staring down an economic inequality crisis. And these corporate Democrats want to just go back to business as usual and go back to the same failed milquetoast neoliberal politics that got us here and created Trump. So unfortunately, what's going to happen is if Joe Biden governs the way I expect him to govern, like Obama 2.0, and says nice things on television, talks the talk, but doesn't walk the walk and fight for legislation that is going to lift up the poor and the working class and communities of color. 2024, make no mistake, another neo-fascist will rise in the Republican Party. And what happens is when things get, when poor and working class people's material conditions get so bad, they gravitate towards authoritarian strongmen, right? They gravitate towards those kind of neo-fascists. It doesn't make sense to liberals, right? Because liberals are living in this comfortable bubble, thinking like everything's great,
Rather be a brunch,
right? And that's one thing I think is that liberals don't get yet. They haven't figured it out. They haven't figured out how complicit they really are in all of this. Because when you're comfortable, when you got money in the bank and you got health insurance, sure, turning on the TV and hearing Obama spouting hope and change platitudes, that's enough for you. Turning on the TV and hearing Joe Biden and Kamala's speech this past weekend, if you got a little money in the bank and health insurance, that's enough for you just to hear those platitudes. But if you are struggling, we have 140 million Americans who are either poor or low income. We have 92 million Americans who are either underinsured or uninsured. Right. And if your material conditions are that bad, you don't give a crap about hope and change platitudes on TV. You're like, where's the food on my table? Where's my Medicare for all? Where are policies that are going to improve our lives? And so it's time for these corporate Democrats to put up or shut up. And I don't think there's enough pressure on them. They got away with running a status quo campaign because Trump is so bad. And so that is why it is so important for the left to, in addition to supporting the squad, we've got to start organizing and building solidarity across the working class. We got to do what Bernie did and build a multiracial, multi-generational working class coalition of people who are just tired of these two corporate parties and who just want to live in a country where everyone has dignity and justice, because that's really what's lacking in our politics. These corporate parties don't care about us, and they've shown us time and time again.
Yeah, I want to stay a little bit on the topic of the squad while you've mentioned them right there. Obviously there were, some victories, some new additions in the House. I'm wondering what kind of effective resistance And, to extent that there will be any kind of effective resistance possible with the McConnell, stranglehold and an impotent Democratic Party, what would you like to see the squad, how would you like to see them behave in Congress, I should say, in this next upcoming term? What would good resistance look like to you?
Well, actually, good resistance looks like what AOC just did 2 days ago, where she basically called out the entire Democratic establishment. And I am so proud, of Alexandria for what she did. She basically said to them, look, I'm not the enemy. Medicare for all is not the enemy. Black Lives Matter is not the enemy. Stop treating the progressive movement and your progressive base like the enemy. She used that strong of words, and she was absolutely right to, because the corporate Democrats, again, they think that they can just feed the people platitudes, punch left, and then govern for Wall Street. Those days are over. Fine, you did that for the last 50 years. You're going to try to pull that status quo BS now in this moment when there's this much inequality? That's not going to fly anymore. So, mad props to what AOC did by, speaking out to the New York Times and saying, and just saying like, yeah, look, we're not the enemies here. That pressure she just put back on the corporatists in her party, that's what they all have to do. I know that Cori Bush is a fighter. That's the kind of, she's in Congress to fight for the working class and communities of color. I followed her, I supported her campaign. I'm excited that, we, instead of 4, we've got 6, or maybe 7 if you include Mondaire Jones and Jamal Bowman. So look, that part is great. But again, they need us on the outside pressuring and pressuring these corporatists. And the other thing I'll say is some progressives think that, they want to, kind of join DSA, which again, I support DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, or they want to join Justice Democrats, and they want to keep, trying to transform the Democratic Party from the inside. And I support that strategy. But I also support the strategy of building power for our movement on the outside with the Movement for a People's Party, joining Cornel West and Nina Turner and Marianne Williamson and everyone who spoke at the People's Convention, and really putting together a party that won't take corporate money and won't be influenced by these powerful corporations. So then we can just push policies for the people. But what I want to say is whether you want to play the inside game and do DSA and Justice Democrats, or you want to play the outside game and do the Movement for a People's Party, we have to have solidarity among progressives against the corporatists. We can't fight. There's not enough progressives for us, for the ones who want to play the inside game and the ones who want to play the outside game, for us to start going at each other. We have to keep solidarity among our movement, among the progressive movement, and I support both strategies. I think both will give us maximum pressure on the establishment. And again, when you've got corporatists who are literally there to serve Wall Street, and who've got people like Nancy Pelosi, who's been there for 3 decades, and think of all the corporate lobbyists she's connected to. Think of all the corporate lobbyists Chuck Schumer's connected to. A lot of people don't realize this. When they wrote the Affordable Care Act back in 2009, 2010. About 4,000 lobbyists descended on Washington to help write that. The Affordable Care Act it is a for-profit predatory healthcare system. It was originally a Republican plan. And the ACA represents corporate Democrats to a T. Right now, Chuck Schumer is on television glorifying it and acting like it's the greatest thing ever. They want to act like the ACA is so great when and premiums have gone up every year since it passed, and most people can't afford their premiums anymore. The ACA is not great. What's great is Medicare for all. But the reason these corporate Democrats defend the ACA and are still peddling it is because it's good for their corporate donors. And these Democrats are owned by the giant insurance companies and big pharma. And so, they get us in this tunnel vision of oh yeah, ACA, pre-existing conditions. Well, guess what? Medicare for all protects everyone with pre-existing conditions, and at a fraction of the cost, and so we have got to stop accepting the framing from these corporate Democrats. We've got to stop compromising our progressive values. We've got to stop allowing them. I mean, time and time again, these corporatists have stabbed us in the back. And then we act like they're our friends, or we act like, here they are. They just elected Chuck Schumer. They just voted for him to be Senate Majority Leader again. Like, are you kidding me? Or Senate Minority Leader?
Yeah,
are you kidding me? Like, that's not a party that's trying to change and trying to appeal to the working class. We know what Chuck Schumer's done for the last few decades. He's governed for Wall Street. So, and I guarantee you they'll do the same thing with Speaker Pelosi. She's already trying to be speaker again. And I'm vehemently opposed to both of them. But again, this is a party that wants to continue to, we're not as bad as the Republicans, right? That's their strategy. Vote for us because we're not as bad as them. Well, guess what? That's not good enough when there's this many people suffering. We need to be able to vote for good if we want to have a better nation. And neither of these parties, honestly, is worthy of our votes, is because neither of them represents the people's interests.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Ryan. And when you talk about the two strategies, working from within versus from outside of the Democratic Party, I personally tend to fall much more on the, working from without outside of the Democratic Party, just for the mentions the reasons you mentioned, whether it be Nancy Pelosi about to be speaker again, who's going to be the death knell of any progressive actual legislation going through the House, let alone a floor vote on Medicare for all, something that we can continue to dream about, but probably won't see. And that just brings us to the Movement for a People's Party, which is something obviously that we've both been huge advocates of here at the Vanguard, and as well as yourself, obviously you're one of the biggest advocates for them on social media. And I just wanted to talk to you about something that's kind of been on my mind lately. And I feel like it's part of the reason why people are so reticent to get on board with third-party politics, with third-party candidates, especially in the presidential elections, is just the media will not, cover them. The media refuses to give them equal time. It refuses to give them a spot at the debate stage. It refuses to really cover them in any serious way, other than maybe as kind of this like freak show oddity type thing. So I'm just wondering if you have any insight into what the MPP in specific is going to do to overcome this hurdle. I personally thought that the Greens should have maybe nominated someone like Jesse Ventura, who could have, forced the media to cover them, right? Because with someone like that, the media is not going to be able to look away. You have almost like a Trumpian effect in that sense. And so far, that's, kind of the best I can come up with as far as forcing the media to cover a third party, forcing a spot on the debate stage, is to nominate someone like a Ventura. What's your thinking on that? And do you have any insight on what the People's Party might be, planning for 2024?
Yeah, I mean, look, you touched on all the key points. I mean, people are born into this country, and it's almost like we're indoctrinated at birth. It's like either you're Coke or you're Pepsi, either you're Republican or Democrat, you're red or blue. They really just indoctrinate us that like there's two choices. And for almost a century, there has only really been two choices. But what we're seeing in the last 40 years as both parties have been captured by corporations and special interest groups, and both parties have not been serving the people. There's polling that shows 57% of people want a new major party. I supported the Greens this past cycle for the first time. I think that there was so much fear mongering around Trump that it was going to be hard for anyone to break through in this cycle.
Fair.
The corporate media and the corporate Democrats were just, fear mongering. I mean, the fear was up to level 1,000 with that. So I think it was going to be hard for anyone to break through. But I think that the strategy is, and you kind of alluded to it with Jesse Ventura and the Greens, is that, look, here's the way I feel. The biggest hurdle to progressive change in 2016 and 2020 wasn't the general election. It was the primary. Yeah. It was the DNC and their rigged primary. I don't feel like they'll ever give a true progressive, like a Bernie type candidate or a Nina Turner type candidate. I don't think the DNC will ever give a true progressive a fair shake. In 2016, we saw from the debate questions to, there was a lawsuit after the 2016 election, and a bunch of Bernie supporters sued the DNC. And I'll never forget seeing the story because I was just so surprised by it. But I was actually more surprised that it wasn't bigger news. But in this lawsuit, or in the trial, the DNC lawyers argued in the court of law. You all can go Google this. They argued that the DNC is a private corporation And if they want to go in a back cigar-filled room and pick out the candidates themselves, that they're well in their right to do that.
That's how they picked Hubert Humphrey.
That right there should have been like the moment that progressives realized that like this is never going to happen in this party. They are never going to give a true progressive a fair shake. And so I do feel in my heart, if Bernie would have ran as an independent this cycle in 2020, he would have had over 15%. All you need is to get over 15% of the vote in the general, right, to qualify for the debates. Now, the debates are watched by 70 million people. So the way I see this in 2024, for instance, is whoever comes out, whoever is the candidate for the People's Party, and we will not run our primaries like Debbie Wasserman Schultz and like the DNC. Like whoever runs the best campaign and whoever the people pick, that will be the people's choice. That will be the people's nominee. And then they'll go to the general election. And because, look, we threw the People's Convention in 3 weeks of planning. We were not covered by corporate media at all. We had over 2 million people watch the People's Convention. We were trending #1 on Twitter because we have big names like Cornel West and Marianne Williamson and Nina Turner. We're able to get more traction, I think, than the Greens do.
Yeah.
And I think the whole idea is our candidate will get over 15%. I'm confident of that in the general. You put a People's Party candidate on a debate stage with those two corporate candidates when 70 million Americans are watching. Who do you think the working class, who do you think the poor, who do you think the middle class who's now being decimated with this predatory capitalistic system we live in? Who do you think they're going to pick? What, the corporatist that the DNC runs who's peddling platitudes, the same platitudes they heard from Obama, the same platitudes they heard from Biden. And then the Republicans will run like a neo-fascist corporatist candidate, kind of spouting the same jargon that they always spout. And then you'll have someone who's actually running on policies, right? Actually fighting for Medicare for all, actually fighting for a Green New Deal, actually fighting for universal basic income. And I think that the choice will be very clear. And I think the media will no longer be able to ignore us. And you are absolutely right. The biggest impediment for a new major party is the media blackout, right? The media is in bed with these two corporate parties. That is how the oligarchy maintains its power. Any Bernie Sanders supporter knows that, all you had to do was turn on the television during the primary, and CNN and MSNBC, the candidates like Joe Biden who support corporatism and support the endless wars and support more of the status quo are always labeled decent and always so compassionate. Whereas the candidates like Bernie who are actually fighting for real change for working class people
and
are
popular issues,
divisive, labeled divisive for actually fighting for policies people want and that will improve their lives. So we know who the corporate media is. We know the gaslighting. We know the fear mongering. We know the anti-progressive bias that the corporate media has. And we're like, okay, great. We've seen this in 2016. We've seen this in 2020. We're still fighting. We're not going to give up because at its core, the people deserve better than this. We all deserve so much better than this. Democrats, leftists, Republicans, independents, every American deserves a political party and a president and a House and a Senate who will represent their interests, who will actually hear the people louder than they hear Wall Street and the billionaire class and these giant corporations. That is the problem in America. And if we don't fix it, the rich is going to keep getting richer. The poor is going to keep getting poorer. The climate crisis is going to keep decimating our communities and our planets. We are on the brink here. And so it is time for bold revolutionary change. And since we're not getting it from either of these parties, we're going to build it ourselves. That's kind of how we feel.
Ryan, one of the things we've been talking about on the show a lot as a potential solution while we're strangleheld by this kind of two-party duopoly we've discussed is, the need for direct action and direct ballot initiatives. And I think that one of the more successful efforts of the DSA has been them pushing a lot of local ballot initiatives. If I'm not mistaken, you're based out of California. Is that correct?
Yes.
I wanted to get your reaction to the ballot measures on the ticket on Tuesday. It was a mixed bag. It wasn't, all terrible, though it certainly wasn't what I think a lot of progressives were hoping for, with Proposition 22 passing, as well as, voting no on the measure to allow local governments to impose rent control. I think those were the two biggest blows as far as a progressive look on ballot measures. Obviously, there was the $200 million propaganda effort. Every time you opened the Uber app in California, you were being fed misinformation about how it was going to hurt Uber drivers. I just wondered if you could talk about how effective that messaging was. I was only spent a little bit of time in California when they were doing that spam. As somebody who maybe was, impacted by more of the propaganda, if you could talk about the effectiveness of the messaging and also how the left needs to counteract that better in the future moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, that again speaks to the problem, how these corporations have so much power that they can literally spend $200 million to convince the public that it's bad to let workers organize and unionize and get paid what they're worth. Like, it's absurd. But one of the biggest initiatives that I know the Movement for People's Party already supports, and I definitely champion because it's going to be key to actually breaking the duopoly, is ranked choice voting. And we saw that in Maine. We saw, Lisa Savage ran a great campaign, brought a lot of national attention to ranked choice voting. We saw it was on the ballot in Massachusetts. There's an initiative, I think, in Colorado now. That is one that we are going to support. That is one where, the corporate Democrats are always like, well, you can't vote for Green Party because they can't win, or you can't vote for a third party. You're just throwing your vote away. Well, ranked choice voting gets rid of that, right? Because you rank, number one, we're voting for the People's Party candidate. Number two, we'll vote for this corporate Democrat. Number three, so you get to rank them. So there's no longer this, you can vote for your hopes. You don't have to settle for the lesser of two evils, which has been happening for the past half century. So I think, ballot initiatives, especially at the local level, are going to be huge as this movement keeps growing. Again, in a state like California, a lot of people think California is super progressive. Guess what? It's very liberal. Neoliberal corporatism has a stranglehold on San Francisco, on Los Angeles. Any city where there's big money, these corporations try to act like, they're so liberal, and they're so, because we celebrate diversity and stuff. They talk the talk, but they don't actually walk the walk. They actually spend money to stop workers from unionizing and from actually having more benefits and getting paid a fair wage. So again, this is the problem in our society, that these corporations, these CEOs, these billionaires have way too much power and way too much money, and working people have very little power and not enough money to fight back. And so, basically these powerful corporations and, people like Jeff Bezos are able to exploit their workers. One thing I always like to say is, predatory capitalism is a system of exploitation. It's never really worked for everyone. Now, the biggest defense of capitalism are people who it's worked very well for. They'll argue, well, it's worked great for my family. But that's just, for you to have a ruling class, you have to have a working class and a poor that the ruling class exploits. Again, so why should we have an economic system, and should we accept an economic system that exploits anyone? Why can't we fight for something better? Why can't we have an economic system where, the working class can build real wealth? And what we've seen in the last 40 years is the working class is going like this, and the top 1% is going up like that. And so it's just not sustainable anymore. And so we've got to start being bold. We've got to challenge this predatory capitalism, and we've got to fight for things like worker co-ops and bringing democracy into the workplace. Any kind of thing that will give the workers more power. Everyone is terrified of the word of socialism, even though that just means that the working class will control the means of production, and the ruling class will no longer control you anymore. So you really have more freedom if you're a working class person. But the fear mongering that CEOs and these corporations have used over the last 75 years against socialism has worked. And what a lot of people don't realize is FDR did not pass the New Deal because Democrats were pressuring him to. FDR passed the New Deal, the biggest piece of legislation for the working class, pretty much in our nation's history. That passed because there was a strong socialist party and there was a strong communist party, if you can believe that or not. And there was a strong labor movement. There was pressure on these two corporate parties, and that forced him to act. That forced FDR to take bold action at the time. That is the kind of pressure we now need to see put on these two corporate parties, because they won't do it. Left to their own devices, our government will continue to operate business as usual, status quo. So we've got to keep building power for those who've had their power taken from them. And, that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree with that assessment. And just to go back to a little bit to third party politics real quick, something that Zach and I were just, kind of broaching on this show the other day, something we were thinking about, the necessity of potentially going forward. And that would be the potential of, the various leftist third parties which do exist kind of getting together and coalescing, maybe some sort of a merger. Zach and I have had a lot of different presidential candidates on this podcast. We've talked to Joseph Kishore of the Socialist Equality Party. We've talked to Gloria La Riva of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. We've talked to Angela Walker and Howie Hawkins of the Green Party. And of course, we've talked to so many people from the Movement for a People's Party. And quite frankly, I mean, there are areas of, differences when it comes to the approach. But overall, I feel like most of you guys are pretty much rooted in a very similar ethos, which is an understanding that the two-party system is a corrupt enabler of the status quo, which of course enables the horrors of capitalism, exploitation, ecocide, all of these things that we're trying to fight back against. Do you see there being any possibility of the MPP joining forces? I know you're not like the one that necessarily would get a call to shots on that or anything, but like, do you think of that as a potentially positive or productive strategy?
Yeah, look, I support building solidarity and having solidarity amongst everyone who's fighting against the duopoly. Like you said, we have so much in common. I know that, in order to beat these two corporate parties, you have to be able to build a coalition that includes working class people who voted for Republicans in the past. Yeah. There is no way, like, I am a leftist, I am a socialist, but I also understand that, like, we're not going to beat these two corporate parties if we are just a leftist party. Now, because leftist policies are so popular, because Medicare for all, New Deal, basic income, guaranteeing, those are all popular policies that we can run on. So we don't have to water down any of our policies to actually appeal to working class voters who maybe in the past have voted Republican or maybe in the past were independents. But if we want to win, if you want to win in 2024, you have to build solidarity, yes, amongst the left, but also amongst the entire working class. You have to build solidarity amongst everyone who's being screwed over by these two corporate parties. Yeah. Excuse my French. That's just the reality of it, because there's enough liberals out there to just drag on this pain that this system is causing 140 million people who are poor or low income. These liberals, they think they're the good guys. Liberals think they're the good guys. Remember, because they're being sedated by the platitudes. They think that, because I supported Obama, like, I'm the good guy. Like, they're convinced that Trump is so bad. And yes, in many ways, Trump is very bad. But make no mistake, America is not dying because of one corrupt president. America is dying because our entire system is corrupt. And both Democrats and Republicans in Washington are part of that corrupt system. They both take money from these powerful interests and govern for these powerful interests and don't govern for the people. And so when you have a government like that, it hurts the people, it hurts the working class, it hurts the poor more than it hurts anyone else. It hurts the people who are being exploited by this predatory capitalism. And so what I'm saying is, I don't want people to have to live in pain anymore. I don't want it. The reason I fight against this system is it breaks my heart to know how many Americans are living in, less than good conditions because of the greed of our ruling class and because of the greed of these corporate parties. That's what we have to align. We have to find our common humanity among everyone in this country who wants to live in a country where everyone has dignity and justice. And so that is the kind of solidarity and the kind of movement that, kind of like how Bernie built, that's the kind of movement that it's going to take to beat the duopoly. So I've I love Angela Walker. I love Howie Hawkins. I've interviewed them as well. I've had Angela on my podcast. I think she's like a fantastic advocate for the working class. I'm so impressed by everything she's done. I will go to battle with her anytime. It's just, how do we continue to focus on building solidarity and remember that the people we're fighting, these two corporate parties, that is who we have to beat. And we're not going to do that unless we can all come together. And that really is the greatest fear of the oligarchs. And that is why they use these kind of wedge issues to divide us. Because as long as the 99% is divided, right, and fighting each other, as long as liberals are fighting conservatives, they're too busy fighting each other to notice that the politicians are rigging the system against us and rigging the system for the 1%. So that's why we have to
rig systems, Ryan. I just interject right there. One of the questions I had for you before we go was just speaking of one of the hidden shields of the ruling class and agents of the oligarchy. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't broach the issue of the Supreme Court after Amy Coney Barrett's hearing. I'm wondering what your perspective is on the best way to handle that situation that we found ourselves in with the 6-3 majority. Are you of the opinion that the best solution is to stack the Supreme Court? Or do you think a better long-term solution might be stripping the court of its ability to perform something like judicial review and undermine the will of the people? What's your perspective on that?
I go back and forth. I think that, look, let's be clear, the reason that the conservatives have a 6-3 majority is because of, again, the complacency of these corporate Democrats. RBG should have stepped down during Obama's presidency. Many progressive activists asked her to, but there's this kind of entitlement, the elites really control the Democratic Party. And so, they're not the ones who have to deal with the repercussions of and the consequences of having a 6-3, the conservatives having a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. They're not an LGBTQ person who could have their rights taken away. They're not a woman who could lose her right to choose. They're not let's be clear. If abortion is taken away, it will be taken away maybe in certain states. It's going to affect women of color and poor and working class women more. Affect wealthy elites, liberal women, right? And so you have to look at and weigh all of this and see that, like, again, when you have a Democratic Party that has chosen to run status quo kind of, corporate extremist campaigns while dressing it up with all these platitudes, it leaves the most vulnerable population and it leaves the working class to have to deal with the consequences of their failed approach and and so yes, I think that expanding the court should be talked about. I think that taking away their power, like you said, is even probably better, but again, we are always going to be at the mercy of these corporate parties for as long as we give them power and stranglehold over our government. We have got to have people in our government who are actually there to serve our interests, because it always feels like, the Republicans are always on offense and they're always attack. And then the Democrats are always kind of playing defense and running away from the progressive policies that we need, right? But the reason the Democrats are running away from progressive policies is because they're serving the same corporate donors that the Republicans are, right? So they just don't tell us that on CNN, because if they did, people would be upset. And so we've got to get away from this kind of corporatist politics that has dominated. The one thing I say, the worst part about the Democratic Party is that it occupies the space of where a true people's party should be. Yeah. And that's why I attack Democrats more than I attack Republicans. I know who Republicans are. They stab us in the front. I can see the blade coming. With these corporate Democrats, again, they say all the right things, then they get into power, they govern just like Republicans for their corporate donors, and then they stab us in the back. And it hurts more when a so-called ally, stabs you in the back than when a known enemy stabs you in the front. And so I'm just, the progressives, there's nothing that the Democratic Party has done that has given progressives any reason to trust them any longer. Time and time again, they have stabbed us in the back. It's time for us to build power, still support the squad, and support their efforts while also building power outside of them. So we're not left to these, Trump got to appoint, what did he appoint? 3 justices, right? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, 3 justices.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. That should have never happened. We should have never gotten to that point. And then, because the liberals don't really run on any agenda, they always run on things like, well, you got to vote for us because of the Supreme Court. Well, it's like, well, if we had a true progressive, we could vote for them because of policies, and then they'll pick great Supreme Courts too, right? Because they don't run on anything, they're always left with, well, no, it's the Supreme Court. It's like, no, that should be like a minor issue, but you guys don't stand for anything else. So you use things like that to get people scared enough to vote for you. So we're always playing catch up because we don't have a true party that represents our interests.
Yeah, well, you mentioned, and we'll let you go here in a second, Ryan. I just had this one last question for you and something to say, which is you mentioned being stabbed in the back by our supposedly progressive allies. And that, of course, reminds me of our favorite senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren. And I think what makes your commentary and thinking on all of these issues so interesting to me and so compelling is that not that long ago, you were on the other side of the aisle when it comes to the more corporate Democrats versus the more progressive left flank of the party. Could you maybe just explain a little bit what changed your mind so massively and how we can take that experience that you had and maybe turn that into a positive tactic as far as changing people's mind, especially when it comes to third party politics, where we do see so many liberals that are just so vehemently in opposition to the concept?
Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize this, but I voted for Bernie in 2016 in the 2016 primary. And then, but here's what's interesting is even someone like me who related with his message, right? I was still not as progressive as I am now, and I hadn't had my big political awakening. So right after the primary, I was upset, that Bernie lost, but I was like a good obedient Democrat. I got right on the train for Hillary and voted for Hillary. And then what's interesting is the kind of message that was put out after that. It was like, well, great job, Bernie. You did a great job, but like, that's just so unrealistic. Everyone having healthcare, future generations having a habitable planet, like go Bernie for fighting for those great things. But that's just not going to happen, right? Because we're a party that doesn't really care about the people. We care about our corporate donors. So the message I got as someone who voted for Bernie in 2016 was, well, that's just, it didn't happen. And then after Hillary lost, this is how powerful our corporate media propaganda is. For the first year after she lost, I bought into some of the BS narrative around Russia. I'll admit it. That is how powerful CNN and MSNBC and the DNC are. Even someone like me who initially supported Bernie, I bought into some of that crap. And so when it was time to support a candidate in 2019, I initially, supported Warren and thought, and let's be clear, Warren also talked a lot more progressive at the beginning of her campaign. Then as it went on, right, she started to back away from some of her more progressive policies like Medicare for all. And so what happened for me was my real big awakening was kind of right after, well, first off, Iowa and the whole thing with the app. Like I was still kind of supporting Bernie. I was supporting both for a minute, and I remember like I would tweet things about Bernie and Warren. I was actually at one point a Warren surrogate. They'd be like, "Why are you doing that? Like, why are you saying nice things about Bernie?" I'm like, "Because I relate with Bernie. Like, I supported him in 2016. Like, or like in a debate, like I there was that one debate where like the two of them were just like going ballistic together against the status quo, and I thought that this is great. This is amazing. Like." He was really pushing Medicare for all. She was really pushing the wealth tax. He was pushing the Green New Deal. And it just felt like, oh my gosh, this is going somewhere. And then right after Iowa, right after all that crap, and after seeing that like Bernie was the one who could win, like Warren didn't have a path after Iowa. Yeah, so that's when I was like, okay, guys, like I left the Warren campaign and endorsed Bernie.
Yeah.
Okay. It is my right. It is anyone's right to do that. I got more shit. And I'm just like this little activist. I'm not like that big of a deal. They made me like I was the most evil person in the world. I left things so amicably. I told Warren's campaign, like, I helped raise $10,000 for Warren's campaign and grassroots money. Like I did a lot for that campaign. I told the campaign, like, this is just what I got to do. I got to follow my heart. Like Bernie is the progressive who has a path and he can win and we need to get behind him. Oh my goodness. It was like, I was the most evil person in the world and they were calling me the meanest names, even though I was totally polite about it. And I said it was a hard thing. But when I saw how like I had every right to endorse Bernie Sanders. I had every right to back him. When I saw kind of like how mean people were because I was making a democratic decision that I felt was the best for the country, for the progressive movement. And then when I saw when Warren finally ended her camp, well, she didn't actually. She hurt Bernie by staying in past Super
waited
Tuesday.
to lose her own state, and then
right. And I was tweeting things like Warren stepped down, like after Obama did his interference, and he had Buttigieg and Klobuchar step out and basically clear the path for Biden. I was tweeting like Warren, like you should step down and endorse Bernie, and I was getting attacked for that. Our politics in the Democratic Party has gotten so fractionalized and everyone is so divided. And at the end of the day, I think that we need to be fighting for policies that are going to lift up working class and poor people who are struggling. And I saw that Bernie was fighting for that. That's why I supported him originally. And I also saw that, like, look, I fed into some of the fear mongering. I kind of was settling myself. And now it's like, there's no reason anyone should settle. We deserve better. There's no reason we should compromise our values anymore. Because when we compromise our values with these corporatists, they don't take an inch, they take a mile, and they don't give us anything. Biden did not make one major policy concession to the left. He did not support Medicare for all. He did not support a Green New Deal. He did not support UBI. He did not support, full student debt cancellation. He gave kind of like these little tiny things, a $15 minimum wage, which really should be $22 now.
Crumbs.
That was what Bernie campaigned on in 2016, $15. So my big awakening was just seeing how corrupt the DNC was, how against Bernie they were the whole time. I remember tweeting against the app. I thought that app thing was ridiculous in Iowa. I mean, a lot of people could see through that. And then Buttigieg came and claimed victory when he really didn't win. I mean, it was all so ridiculous. And I think that, I just think that it's time for us to fight for what we believe in. I think that the reason Democrats lose is they compromise. There's a lot of Democrats who think that they have to compromise their values to win. No, we have to fight for our progressive values to win. And especially if we want to win policies for the people who are struggling the most. And so I hope more people keep waking up. That's the whole point. Like, don't stay stuck in your politics. The whole point of life is to grow and evolve and change. And I think Americans, we like, oh, well, I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to be a Democrat forever. Well, it's like, well, the Democrats aren't really who they say they are, and everyone's struggling, and we really need real change. And so I think that I encourage people to look outside the box and to, don't blindly follow your leaders. In a democracy, which we don't really live in, America is an oligarchy, but the whole point is not to blindly obey a corporate party. The whole point is to question and challenge and demand better from them. And we didn't see any of that, and so that really was it for me when I saw people attacking me for endorsing Bernie. And then it was, it's really what happened. These liberals just radicalized me more. When the Warren crew all just told me I was horrible and garbage for fighting for what I believed in and doing and following my heart. When you believe something in your heart, you're going to fight for it, and that's just the kind of person I am. So the more people push back, the more pushback I got from the DNC, from Warren type people and from Biden supporters, the more I'm just like, dude, like, no, like, this is what I believe in. I believe in a single payer healthcare system. I believe in, a Green New Deal for, so we'll have a habitable planet for the future. And now I believe that, like, we need to even move further. Like I went from being what you'd call a progressive in 2018 to, like, I'm a socialist now. Like I'm comfortable calling myself that. And I think we live in a time where I hope a lot more people realize that we need to have a lot less predatory capitalists and a lot more democratic socialists if we're going to have a sustainable economy, if we're going to have a sustainable planet. The path we are on right now is not sustainable. Capitalism is destroying our planet. It's destroying our people. We have got to start fighting and moving and shifting towards, an economy that is, distributes wealth evenly and isn't just destroying our ecosystem. And so I hope more people start to realize that. And the last thing I'll say is I think that, I think a lot of our parents' generation, I know my parents, like, even though capitalism has never worked for everyone, again, to have a ruling class, you have to have a working class and a poor that the ruling class exploits. But capitalism worked for a lot more people in the 60s and 70s and for our parents' generation than it's working for now. And I think that a lot of people are just, they get their news from corporate media. They should be watching you guys. They should be getting their news from you and more independent media. But so they're not really seeing that like capitalism didn't end up very well. It ended up with us having 2 billionaires now own more wealth than half of our entire nation. Capitalism ended up with it now hitting 100 degrees in the Arctic for the first time in history. Capitalism turned out that like we're losing entire species of animals. And so it's not working. And I think our parents' generation, I know my parents, their idea of capitalism is a lot different than our generation's idea, because our generation has now lived through 3 recessions and, multiple wars, and we're just tired of it. Our generation is strong. Our generation is thinking outside the box. I'm a millennial and Generation Z, the ones below me, y'all are even more radical. Like my partner's Cuban, and I told him, I'm like, you think it's crazy that I'm a socialist, that Generation Z, they're communists. Like it's like, and so there's just like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's different now for us. We're waking up and seeing that like the system we have isn't fair and it isn't right. And we don't have to accept it anymore. We can fight for something better. And so I would encourage everyone who's still kind of a more corporate Democrat or a more kind of a neoliberal, like open your eyes, like kind of see what's going on. Things aren't working. And if you think they're working for you, look at your neighbor and just see like the path we're heading. And I think if people saw the big picture and they opened their eyes a little wider, I think they'd start. I think the biggest regret that liberals will have when they do wake up is that they didn't support Bernie Sanders. I really think that he was like trying to save the Democratic Party from itself.
Compromise. Yeah. The compromise.
Yeah, and
he was the great shark.
He was. And I think that'll be the big regret for if these centrists ever really do wake up, that the way they treated Bernie, like all he was trying to do was bring the party back to its FDR roots and stop all of this corporate greed that has just destroyed our country and really turned America into an oligarchy. We're not a democracy. Democracy is a government that's of, by, and for the people. We're an oligarchy, which is a government that is of, by, and for the ruling class. Yeah. And more people need to just understand what's really happening so we can start to move toward justice and dignity. So anyways, it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. I've been doing
Ryan,
so many interviews. Sorry,
time.
I'm a little tired today, but
no worries at all. Just for a quick plug before you go, where can people go to keep up with you, follow what you're doing, support you and that kind of thing?
You can follow me on Twitter at Proud Socialist, and you can also download my podcast for free. It's on, wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. There it is right there. You can get it on Anchor. It's called Amped Up with Ryan Knight, and I've had some great guests like Senator Nina Turner, Christina Levo, who was running for Congress.
Yeah, we spoke to her as well.
Mark Charles, who was an independent candidate for president, Angela Walker from the Green Party, Peter Dow, who used to support Hillary and then supported Bernie in 2020. He had a big political evolution too. So I have a show once a week. It's about an hour, and
everybody should check it out.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today, Ryan. And as I mentioned, or Zach mentioned, everyone that's watching should go check out Ryan's show. We've had a lot of the same podcast guests in common, and obviously, we're part of our mission here is to build left independent media and make sure people are plugged into the right outlets. So thanks so much for everything you're doing to shift the public's opinion on these matters, advocating for the movement for a people's party. So many massively important things. It can't be overstated how much great work you're doing. So thank you so much for all that and for joining us tonight, Ryan. I hope you have
Ditto. Thank you guys for everything you guys are doing too. You guys are kicking ass.